This lecture briefly discusses the differences and similarities between prokaryotic and eukaryotic cells. If we look at prokaryotic and eukaryotic cells, there are some features that all of them share. So, cell theory is that all cells come from other cells, and that cells are the basic unit of life. And so all cells are going to have these four characteristics. They all have a plasma membrane. So in this case, the plasma membrane is the membrane you see here, or the orangish or darker yellow membrane that you see in this cell here. So this is a eukaryotic cell, prokaryotic cell. So both of them have the plasma membrane made of phospholipids. It's selectively permeable, helps keep certain things in, certain things out. Different organisms have different proteins in their plasma membranes, help regulate the traffic rate into and out of the cell. They also have a fluid inside the cell called cytosol. It's sort of semi-fluid, sort of the goo inside that everything resides in. It's where diffusion occurs, where the nutrients can get around the cell, and waste products and all that kind of stuff. Chromosomes that carry genes. All cells have DNA as their genetic material. So here's the chromosome in this cell, and the chromosomes in this cell are going to be located in this area. And then ribosomes, all the little dots. You can see some dots in here or attached on this membrane in this case. And these are just free-floating. So ribosomes are the protein-making factories. All cells need proteins. Remember, proteins are most of our enzymes. They're structural, they're receptors, they're transport proteins. They're very important for all cell movement. So all cells need ribosomes to make proteins. If we look at the prokaryotic cells, they have some unique characteristics. So this is an example of a prokaryotic cell. This one's particularly in the domain bacteria, but there are also prokaryotic cells make up the domain of archaea. Archaea is actually more closely related to eukarya evolutionarily. If we look at their relationships, bacteria are least closely related. But cell type-wise, bacteria and archaea are both prokaryotes. They're the first type of cell to arise. The Earth, to remind you, is 4.6 billion years old. And so the prokaryotic cells, we start seeing evidence of them around 3.5 billion years ago. And remember, a billion years is 1,000 million years, so quite some time. All prokaryotic cells compose only single-celled organisms. They do have some kind of aggregate behavior sometimes. They signal between each other, and they can come together to behave as a unit, sort of, but we consider them single-celled. They're generally small, 1 to 10 micrometers. They don't have a nucleus. Instead, they have a nucleoid, which is this region here in this cell. So the DNA is not floating everywhere. It's contained sort of in a region, but there is no membrane bounding that region. And their chromosomes are circular, so they have usually a single circular chromosome. That's going to be its DNA, still double-stranded. Prokaryotic cells also don't have large, complex membrane-bound organelles. You can see inside there's not a lot of additional structures. Prokaryotic cells do have some small membrane-bound organelles, things that detect magnetic fields and stuff like that, depending on the cell type, but they're not going to be these complex ones like eukaryotes. Almost all prokaryotic cells have cell walls, so this is a bacterium. This yellow part is the cell wall here. They're made of a protein sugar complex called peptidoglycan in bacteria, so different than cell walls in like plants. Some have flagella, that's what these are here. Eukaryotes can also have flagella, but they're made of different types of proteins and they're assembled very differently. They do have a cytoskeleton in prokaryotes, but it's going to have different proteins than eukaryotic cytoskeleton. These guys are going to divide by binary fission, which basically means you take the bacterium and it splits itself. So here's the DNA. It gets copied, so now there's two DNAs being split and pulled apart. In the end, you have two bacteria with their DNA inside of them. So that's binary fission. And then prokaryotic cells actually were engulfed in order to form parts of eukaryotic cells. So this is the endosymbiotic theory. So endosymbiosis was when there were respiring bacteria that could do cellular respiration in the sense of making ATP. They got engulfed and eventually turned into mitochondria in eukaryotes. Also, there's bacteria that can do photosynthesis. They got engulfed in some cells in eukaryotes and eventually became the chloroplast. So prokaryotes are actually help make up what eukaryotes are today. Here's an example of a real picture, TEM. It's a little harder to see the parts, but here's the nucleoid region. There would be your cell wall and your capsule. It's the sticky coat on the outside. Not all prokaryotic cells have capsules, but many do. Fimbriae are little projections that help some prokaryotic cells stick to their to surfaces. And not all bacteria or prokaryotes are shaped like this. This happens to be a rod-shaped bacterium. Eukaryotic cells, to compare them, arose later in Earth's history. We don't see them till about 1.8 billion years ago. Here's an example of a yeast cell we're going to look at. Eukaryotic cells make up the organisms in the domain Eukarya. Eukarya has the plants, animals, fungi, and the protist group. It's a very diverse group, so they have single-celled organisms like this yeast. Some organisms, some types of protists are colonial. And then there's multicellular organisms, which are in all four kinds of groups of eukarya. They're typically larger than prokaryotic cells, 10 to 100 microns. Their DNA is enclosed in a membrane. We call it the nucleus. So here in the purple, this is the DNA, and then it's enclosed in a nuclear envelope. So it's a true nucleus. This, of course, is a cut-through of a yeast cell, so the nucleus is completely closed. They have membrane-bound organelles. You can see some of them stained in orange here. There's other ones not stained. Those guys are complex and made of phospholipid bilayers. And then they have many linear chromosomes instead of the circular chromosome like prokaryotes have. Some eukaryotes have cell walls made of different materials than prokaryotes, so all plants have cellulose cell walls. Many fungi have chitin cell walls, and some protists have cell walls made of silica or cellulose, etc. So if I asked you, if I said cell wall as a characteristic, you'd mark both prokaryotes and eukaryotes as possibly having that. Now animals, you notice, don't have cell walls, and they're in eukaryotes. Some eukaryotes have flagella, eukaryotic cells, so some animal cells, like sperm's a good example. Certain types of protists use flagella or cilia to move. Plant sperm cells can have flagella, but they're different than prokaryotes in structure. They have cytoskeleton as well, but it's different proteins than the prokaryotes. Eukaryotes have actin, tubulin, and keratin as their basic building blocks of their cytoskeleton. So actin's the actin microfilaments, tubulin makes the microtubules, and keratin makes up the intermediate filaments. Eukaryotic cells divide by mitosis and meiosis, depending on the cell type. Those are both processes of splitting the nucleus and then splitting the cell cytoplasm in half. Here's a picture of a stereotypical eukaryotic animal cell. This one does not have a cell wall. That's because it's an animal cell. You can see the cytoskeletal different types of filaments here. Here are your complex membrane-bound organelles. This is the nucleus. You can see the envelope on the outside containing the DNA. Here's a flagellum that's possibly part of some eukaryotic cells. Here are some microvilli projections, not in all eukaryotic cells either, but that's a possibility. These are some real pictures of animal cells and fungal cells, which are both types of eukaryotic cells. You can see in both of them a nucleus that's membrane-bound, and then here's a scanning electron micrograph of this yeast cell type. This one's undergoing mitosis, budding into two parts. Here's a plant cell, looks a little different. It has a cell wall this time, this big vacuole area in the middle. It's containing fluid in there full of ions and nutrients, hydrolytic enzymes. You can see again it has complex membrane-bound organelles, cytoskeletal structures, a nuclear envelope enclosing the DNA. And here are some examples of plant cells. You can really see the chloroplast in there, and the nucleus. These are kind of usually more angular, the ones with cell walls. There's also protists that have chloroplasts. You can see here also a membrane-bound nucleus. That's why we consider those eukaryotes. So those are the basic differences and similarities between prokaryotic and eukaryotic cells. It's likely you'll have a table of some sort that you'll have to either fill out or put yeses and nos of different characteristics, and are they found in prokaryotes, are they found in eukaryotes, are they found in both, and then also a plant section and an animal section as well.